Hi there, my name is Jim, also known as FinalNeuron, and I'm talking to a camera. So we have started a Star Wars RPG adventure, is what the rule system calls it, based on the originally 1987 Star Wars role-playing game rule set from West End Games. Sadly, West End Games went out of business some time ago, and they were cool enough that they put out their rule books and their supplements and all of their campaigns and everything free. It's an open license, so you can distribute it, you can use it and make copies and so on. You just can't charge for it. That's how I understand it. So anyway, I'll put a link in the description for anybody that wants to go and check this out. Even if you're just an old school Star Wars nerd like me, it's really interesting. There's some interesting tidbits about the world of Star Wars as it used to be. So anyway, this is the second edition rule book. There is a community created rule book, which frankly, it's a better rule book. The reason why we're not going to use it is because I had this rule book, this one, when I was a kid, when I was younger, and I always wanted to run on this rule set, and I just never had the people to do it with. So anyway, that's the rule set we're going to be using. But if you were going to start using it, you may want to use the community created one that's available at the link in the description that I will create in the future. So let's flip through some of these pages here. I wanted to make this video just to talk a little bit about some of the system in this rule set, because it's pretty simple and flexible. And it might be useful to know a little bit of what's going on if you're going to follow our role play. Here's the cover. Looks great. It looks like what you would expect out of a Star Wars rule book from the 1980s, the late 80s, early 90s. The rule set is pretty simple, actually. You can see this is an example character sheet. And for example, under dexterity, it has a few different skills listed. Some of them don't have a dice code next to them. If you stripped out all of those, and if you stripped out the background and so on, this would be a pretty small character sheet. Pretty small indeed. And that's it. Like there are not that many stats that you have to keep track of. It's pretty much their attributes, their skills, their move, and then if they're force sensitive, you may have force powers and so on. It's pretty simple, and that's kind of typical of the rule system too. It can account for just about anything, but it's at the same time fairly simple. It's had a pretty loyal following over the years. The attributes are totally not the normal attributes that you would expect if you are a fan of role-playing games. For example, here they are. Dexterity. Okay, sure, we all know dexterity. Knowledge. What? Knowledge is an attribute. Mechanical. Perception. Strength. And technical. And those are the 6 attributes that rule every action you might take. Dexterity is what you would expect. The book describes it as eye-hand coordination and agility. So, for example, most ranged weapons are going to be linked to this attribute, or the skill for it will be linked to the attribute. Knowledge, your character's knowledge of the galaxy. A lot of the time, this can be used to decide if a character could reasonably pick extra information out of a situation. So an example of a knowledge skill would be, I think it's called street smarts. And that just means that you have knowledge about illegal operations, how they work, how you would gain the trust of them to be able to do business with them, and so on. So knowledge skills can be, in my opinion, they can be a little useless because they're too specific, or they can be really strong because they're really broad. And considering how big the galaxy of Star Wars is, hundreds of thousands of planets across the galaxy, something like knowledge of planetary systems, which is a skill, could be really powerful. The mechanical attribute, that's more or less your ability to use machinery. So that includes flying a starship, or it could include using a mounted weapon, like in A New Hope, when they go to jump onto the quad gun turrets in the Millennium Falcon and they're shooting them. That skill would be a mechanical skill. And the next attribute is perception. And it's a little weird. Here's how they describe perception. Your character's powers of observation, okay, and ability to convince others to do things for him. So it's kind of perception and it's kind of charisma rolled into one. I can appreciate a system that doesn't have too many attributes because you end up spreading yourself a little thin. So perception includes the ability to con people. It's a bit of a stretch, but okay, I guess I can go with that. And then strength. Strength is what you would think in some ways. It's connected to your skills that involve melee combat. We'll talk about that in a bit. There's a few different ones like that. But it also, strength is the attribute that you roll directly against damage to see how badly you could be wounded. So once you take damage, strength decides how much damage you're going to end up taking. And then technical. And the difference between technical and mechanical is that technical is basically repair. That's like 95% of technical is repair. But repair also kind of includes the ability to improve things. So you can very much play a character that's got like a beat up old freighter, a starship, and over time just work on it and tinker it and turn it into something really impressive. And you can do the same with, your blaster and so on. Now the rule set puts a separate skill for every class of starship and for some different systems in it. For example, you would need a blaster repair skill to work on a starship's blasters. The way that we're going to do that is we're going to say if you have the starship repair skill, you can repair a starship. You're not going to need starship repair and blaster repair and repulsor lift repair for like the landing system. We're not going to split it up that much. All of us are new to the rule system, so we're just not going to make it that complicated. For the same reason, we're not going to be doing characters that are force sensitive. We'll get into that at some point. So yeah, so those are so non-standard for role-playing games. Kind of makes sense for the world of Star Wars. Because when you think about Star Wars, what do you think of? Blaster fights, people shooting, at each other while running down futuristic looking corridors and so on. Flying starships, lightsaber duels, and people trying to talk their way into and out of weird situations. So yeah, I think it's a pretty good set of attributes to tell the kind of stories that tend to get told in Star Wars. When you roll a character, and you can see kind of in the bottom right here, it says human attribute dice, 12 dice. When you're creating a character, you pick a race, and then the race of that character, whether you're human or, Sullustan or Wookiee or whatever you are, that race will have minimum and maximum numbers for attributes. Humans are, as you might expect, they're kind of average at everything. They have a minimum of 2 and a maximum of 4. When it says there's 12 dice, that means every human's got 12 dice in all of their attributes as a minimum. You'll have 2 dice in the 6 attributes at a minimum. When you create a new character, you're going to get, 6 dice. 6 dice to add to your attributes, up to your racial maximum. So for a human, up to 4 dice. And what they kind of recommend is that you do a couple of 4 dice attributes, a couple of 3 dice attributes, and then you leave, whatever's left at 2. And there's a little more description here. You can split up your dice. The rule system allows you to split dice into up to 3 parts. And a +1 is called a pip. So if you have 2 dice plus 1 in your blaster skill, you roll 2 dice and then add 1 to the total. Or if it's 2 dice plus 2, you roll 2 dice, you add the dice together, and then you add 2, and that's your total. So you can split them up. In my opinion, why would I want 3 dice plus 2 in an attribute when I could have 4? Like if I really want to improve it. But anyway, the rule system is flexible enough to do that. So you get 6 dice to add to attributes. You get 7 dice to add to skills. The way that this works, I'm not quite sure why they decided it. You can add 1 or 2 dice to skills. So if you decided to, you could pick 7 skills and give them all +1 dice. Or you could have, 3 skills at 2 and then another +1. So 4 total. It might seem kind of limiting at first that you would have no more than 7 skills. But the way that this rule system works is that if you don't have the skill for it, you just roll the attribute that it's related to. So for example, blaster is a dexterity skill. Well, if you don't have the blaster skill, it doesn't mean you can't use blasters. It just means you roll your dexterity. And there's no penalty. Some rule systems, if you don't specifically have that skill for that thing, you're going to take a penalty every time you try to use the skill. Not in this one. So that's pretty neat. If you have a 4 dexterity, or if you're some alien race that had even more, you could theoretically have just as good of a skill with a blaster as somebody that had a kind of low blaster skill. There is one exception to this, and that is you can take one of your 7 starting dice and you can split it to give yourself 3 specializations. And a specialization is a much more narrow version of a skill. So for example, instead of taking blasters, you could take heavy blaster. That gives you the limit that you can only use the skill with a heavy blaster, but you also are getting basically 2 extra dice at character creation. And when you go to level up that skill, it only takes half as much in order to level it up. It's half as costly to level up that skill. So there's good things about specializations. If you were pretty sure you were going to do something very specific, maybe take a specialization for it. That's an interesting twist. We're going to see how our guys handle that. They may, I suspect they'll go for it because they're kind of min-maxers anyway. They're probably going to want to take the extra dice. Improving skills. If you're going to improve a skill, you take the dice code that you have for that skill and you pay that many character points, which are basically experience. You pay that many character points and it will go up by +1. And so I said earlier, you can break a dice into pieces. So you could have, say, a blaster skill of 4 dice. And when you level it up, it'll go to 4 dice +1. If you level it up again, it goes to 4 dice +2. If you level it up again, it goes to 5 dice. So the way it always goes is like dice +1, dice +2, 2 dice. And the way that you use that is if you have like 4 dice +2 in blaster, you roll 4 dice, total them up, you add 2. So that's how you level your skills. That's how you use character points. We're going to see how we do this in our play. I'm not sure how many character points I'm going to give per session, but obviously if you have a game master that's giving more or fewer character points, people are going to level their skills faster or slower. I'm going to try to control it so that they're able to level a couple of skills at least early on, but then later on they're going to have to start making choices about what to level and focusing on whatever is actually important to them for that character. Improving attributes is evil. It's evil. First of all, improving an attribute costs 10 times the number of dice it already has in it. So improving a skill, it costs the number of dice you have in it. So if you have a 6D in blaster, it costs you 6 character points to try to level it up. Leveling up a 4 dice dexterity costs you 40 character points. And that might seem a little ridiculous and unfair. But at the same time, you can remember that basically every character has every skill, whether you've trained it or not. You can use your attribute to do an action and you'll take no penalty. So attributes are really strong. Also, I would guess they're trying to prevent characters from becoming superhuman this way. If you trained your strength up to a 20, you're going to have to get hit by an AT-AT or something before you're going to actually end up taking damage. So, yeah, The focus on skills I like a lot, but at the same time, it kind of means when you set your attributes in the beginning, they're not going to change very much. Oh, and by the way, even if you do pay the huge cost to improve your attributes, there's a chance it'll fail. And the closer you get to your racial maximum, the higher the chance of you failing. Um, yeah, and if it fails, you lose half of half of the character points that you put into it. So it's a risky proposition. It's something you probably don't even want to consider until you've developed a character for a while. If you upgrade an attribute, it does also upgrade all the skills attached to it. So it is quite a powerful thing to do if you're willing to pay for it. Okay, combat. The rulebook divides play into two different types of situations. They call them scenes and rounds. Scenes are basically characters are just kind of doing what they want with no real time limit. The game master may throw some things at them during a scene to challenge them. But when you're in a situation where the amount of time that your skills take is very important, they're calling that a round. So specifically in combat, it's rounds. How many times can I shoot a blaster at you, and how many times can you shoot back at me? That's ruled by the rules for rounds. The rounds in combat are actually pretty simple. You roll initiative, and I think that's just your perception score. Yeah, so it says the character with the highest perception on each side rolls that attribute. The character who gets the highest roll gets to decide whether his side acts first or last. So if you, for some reason, decide that you want your side to go second, you can do that. You have the initiative. And then once you've done that, you're going to roll actions. Now, here's how actions work during rounds. You declare at the beginning how many actions you're going to take. And for every action after the first one, all actions you take get a -1 dice penalty. That's pretty harsh. That's pretty harsh. So if you have 6 dice in blaster and say 6 dice in dodge, you can say, okay, I'm going to do 2 actions. I'm going to fire my blaster, and then I'm going to dodge. I'm going to try to dodge whatever they send back my way. Well, that means that you end up rolling 5 dice in each of those skills. If you tried to fire your blaster 3 times, well, that's fine. But that means that you're going to be basically rolling 3 dice each time, which is way weaker than your normal 6 dice. So again, it gives you the opportunity to make some interesting choices. Am I going to increase the risk of failing by taking more actions, or am I going to try to get more things done in this round? And because your damage avoidance skills are also affected, you're also taking a risk with your character. That's something that you have to take into account as well. And we're going to see how it goes. I may end up accidentally squishing some noobs on accident. There is something that you can do, which is kind of a special action. I'll talk about that in a second. When you are rolling an attack against someone, there's a difficulty. And in most cases, the difficulty is you're firing a blaster. Most of the time, it's going to be ranged attacks. The difficulty is based on the distance and the weapon you're using. So something that's geared for longer ranges, you'll have an easier time firing at longer distances. Your chances of success are going to be a lot better. However, that kind of target number, let's pull a number out. Let's say at a distance of 30 meters, your blaster has a target number of 15. You beat the target number of 15, it's a hit. So if you're shooting at someone at that range, they can make a choice. They can take a reflex action or a reaction action. They can use a skill like dodge to try to dodge a ranged attack. Now, if they don't dodge, if they just stand there while you shoot at them, you're rolling against the difficulty based on the range. If they do dodge, the new difficulty number is whatever they get for their dodge skill. So let's say you're firing at somebody that, like, your blaster can just barely shoot that far. Just barely. And they decide to dodge. So they may actually take your target number that would be really difficult and make it easier to hit them. That would be pretty terrible for them. That'd be a terrible idea. And at the same time, if you're behind different kinds of cover, you also are adding to the difficulty to be hit. You're adding to the target number they have to roll to hit you. So dodging in those kinds of situations might be a really terrible idea. Any of these reaction skills like dodge, or you can use your starship piloting skill to try to dodge fire. There's another action you can take, like I was saying, and that is called a full reaction. If you decide to do a full reaction, you announce that at the beginning of the round, and then you will roll your skill and you will add that to the difficulty number. So however hard it was going to be for them to hit you before, plus your skill roll. The idea is it becomes very, very, very hard for them to hit you, right? Obviously, you can't do anything else in that round. Nothing else. Only that one skill. Again, that's a choice. I'm not going to be able to stop them. I'm not going to be able to shoot at them. Technically, you're also not moving when you do it. So, for example, if you were in a starship trying to move to a hyper jump point so you could get away, well, you're not going to get there any sooner when you're doing a full reaction, because you're just doing too much maneuvering and twisting and turning to be making any progress. I am very much looking forward to how the guys figure this out as I try to kill them. To some extent, it's going to be up to me to make sure they don't get squished too hard. Now, when you get hit, how badly you're hurt, there are no hit points or anything in the game. You get one of a number of different wounded states. So, for example, you get hit, different weapons have a different number of damage dice, and you roll those dice. If the damage dice goes above their strength dice by a certain amount, they'll get one of different wounded states. If you beat their strength roll by 0, in other words, a tie, to 3, they get a stun. And a stun subtracts 1 dice from all of their actions for the rest of that round and the next round. If you beat it by 4 to 8, they are wounded. If they're wounded, they fall to the ground. They can't do any actions for that round, and they have -1 dice to all actions after that. Every round, not just for a couple of rounds, but for every round after that. If you beat their body roll by 9 to 12, they're incapacitated. You roll 10 dice and they are KO'd for that many. So it's a minimum of 10 dice. If you rolled 10 ones, 10 minutes that they're knocked out, and it's up to an hour. If you roll 13 to 15 above their resistance, they are mortally wounded, which means they're knocked out, and they have to roll every round to find out if they're dead. And statistically, you've got maybe 2 or 3 rounds to get some first aid before you're going to die if you're mortally wounded. And then if you beat the resistance roll by 16 or more, they're just dead. There are a few different ways that you can compound some of these. Like if you get stunned over and over and over, you can't just ignore it forever. If you take a number of stuns equal to your strength dice, you get KO'd. And it's for at least a couple of minutes. So basically, even if you can't really wound an enemy, if you can stun them enough times, they're knocked out, and then, you've won the combat. They're knocked out. If you get wounded twice, getting wounded means you have -1 dice to all dice rolls. If you get wounded twice, -2 dice to all dice rolls. And again, that's kind of like if you were trying to take 3 actions a turn, except you're getting the same penalty if you're only doing 1. So it's a pretty harsh penalty. And if you get wounded again after that, you go straight to incapacitated. And incapacitated, again, is like you're knocked out. If you get incapacitated and then you take a wounded or an incapacitated, you move up to mortally wounded. And if you're mortally wounded and you take an incapacitated or another mortally wounded, then you're dead. So not only will you get these different statuses based on damage from one attack, they can actually stack up a little bit and push you further up towards getting killed. So that's most of the rules that I wanted to go over. There's a lot of little minutia that is involved for something specific, like Here's some recommended target numbers if you're trying to climb a fence. Well, that's okay. We'll either look that up or make it up as we go along. Combat is actually pretty simple. There's a pretty simple calculus. How many actions am I going to take? Am I going to try to avoid, or do I think that they're probably going to miss me? Is my cover going to protect me enough or not? And leveling is actually pretty simple. The character sheets are pretty simple. The rule set is pretty simple. And hopefully that's going to allow us, because in our group, we're all kind of min-maxers, if we want to admit it. Hopefully it's going to push us to focus more on the story and on our characters and how they act and their little quirks. And we have access, like I said earlier, we have access to all of the campaigns that West End Games put out, and also some community campaigns that have been released alongside of it. I'm really looking forward to this. I already know what I'm going to do to them first, and it's going to be glorious. It's going to be fun. And I think it's going to be a really good kind of gauge of how things are going to go in the future for it. So hopefully that made sense. If you have any questions, you should ask questions. You should ask them down there in the comments. Like the thing and subscribe, and ring the ding-a-ling, and wash behind your ears, eat your vitamins and whatever.